what are the best mechanics in Vanguard, and I've gone through all eras, all stages, all generations of Vanguard, and I've played pretty much everything. And let's talk about the best things that have happened in Vanguard and the things that, weren't so great. And I think with Standard, they have implemented some of this stuff and some of them purposely not implemented. And some that may be implemented very, very soon. So let's talk about it. I know a lot of people are, grading these mechanics differently. And before I continue with this video, this is my opinion. This is what I think the best mechanics are and my reasonings for it. And, if you guys don't like it, then unlucky. It doesn't matter, right? But do let me know down in the comments what you guys think of your own mechanics and your own tier list, right? And where things are supposed to be. So there's a bunch of them, but yeah, we'll go through one by one and just kind of explain how things are. So perfect guards. I think perfect guards, if we're talking about like the benchmark neutral, I think B is for benchmark, right? B is like, it must be there. It's not great. It's not like bad. It's just neutral, right? So I think perfect guards, it's needed for the game. As power scales, things happen and you kind of need to guard your way out of it. And perfect guards have been a thing since the start of time. So, B, completely perfect. And actually, to be honest, if it was so good that it started at the start of Vanguard and it's still here today, maybe it's an S tier mechanic, right? But I think the perfect guard mechanic is completely fine. Nothing too special about it, and it is necessary for the game. Forerunners. Forerunners, for sure, is one of the best mechanics ever released in Vanguard, and I cannot believe that they got rid of it, right? Happiness Collector, one of my favorite starters in all of Vanguard. And there's just so many more, and I think you can tie a really strong effect to a Forerunner. And Forerunners are usually tied to a cost as well. So if you tie, Happiness Collector to a GB1, something needs to be called from Soul, that's being gated, right? Lizard Soldier Conroe, right? CB1 to search for a grade 1 or less, right? Also gated by Counterblast. So you can kind of play around like these mechanics. And I think that's really good because Forerunners also have the ability to stay in Soul. Let's just say you're versing a Retire deck, right? You can just keep it in Soul, don't have to call it out. And I think that's a really cool way to put certain effects, maybe like kind of like ace unit effects or once per game effects, kind of, onto a card, right? Because you're only ever going to start with it, yeah? And I think there's just a lot of dynamics that you can do with Forerunners that you can't do with Vanguards that don't come out of Soul. You're essentially using one Soul to get an ability that is like, really good, right? If you think about it, Lizard Soldier Conroe is actually Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1 in this era. Because it doesn't give you the Soul that your starter normally would give, and it's gated behind a Counterblast. So I think Forerunners, very cool mechanic, and I'm really sad that they did not bring that back because there's so many things that they could do, and yeah, unfortunately, that's just how it is. Mega Blast. Mega Blast is so overcosted for something with little payoff, and I'm not going to put it in F because I think there are certain Mega Blasts that were really good scaling into like the later generations. For example, Steel Vampire. Hongwei used I think it's like Shahara with Steel Vampire, and that was really cool. It's really good innovation, and being able to include these heavy costed cards that have some of them are really good. Some of them were really bad, and like good ones are like Steel Vampire, right? Being able to use that and I guess come up with a strategy to use that and kind of analyzing the tournament scene, you can kind of catch people off guard, move a grade 0 to the Vanguard, and then your opponent just, can't really do anything. So I think it's super overcosted for most, if not all clans, but there are some clans that can get the resources back, like DI, to be able to pull something like that off, right? Special Intercepts. Special Intercepts is terrible, and terrible in the sense that you're never going to get an intercept off because there will be decks and clans and nations that retire, right? So Spot retires, just destroys the special intercepts. I think that a special intercept mechanic could have been done better. Maybe they gave like, similar to like blockers in One Piece, where they have, it cannot be removed from the field and you can kind of redirect the attack. I think that would be pretty cool. But obviously, you know, that would be really, really strong in a game of Vanguard. I think like if you're redirecting a 60k onto a rear guard, yeah, that's pretty strong. But I guess then, you know, there are, I guess, cons to it, right? Maybe the card has like super low power, or like it's just a vanilla and it just stays on the board. And then like in premium, that would be super nuts, right? You know, you can just call it from drop with Grand Blue, or, you know, call it from Soul with Pale Moon or something like that. So there's a lot of like intricate interactions that make certain clans really strong with that. But yeah, I think they could have definitely explored special intercepts further, and obviously adopting stuff like blockers from One Piece into Vanguard, but in maybe a slightly different way. Ride chains. I think ride chains is just okay. And the reason why I say it's just okay is that it allowed for a different way to deck build. I think now, you know, you have a ride deck. You have the perfect rides from 0, 1, 2, and 3. And your deck building is just like chucked in with 4 of every single staple card that you need for your archetype. Ride chains, for example, you start with grade 0, you might get the right grade 1 ride, you might not. And there are cards like Tsukuyomi, for example, later on in G era and late G era, it got ride fixes, right? And even in V, also got retrains of the ride line. So being able to have cards that substitute for components of the ride line to ride up, I think that's really cool. But I think the ride chain mechanic is okay, because sometimes when you don't get the ride chain and you're versing a deck that doesn't need a ride chain, then you kind of fall apart. So maybe like the ride chain, if it was implemented in any way, maybe gave more reward, would actually satisfy it being a better mechanic. But I think, you know, it was kind of replaced with ride lines, and ride lines kind of do their own thing. And ride lines, I guess, frees up more slots for other deck building. But that's obviously not the case in Standard. In Standard, you're literally playing more copies of your staple cards, and there's no dynamic in deck building at all. Like, unfortunately, that's just how it is. And it's not very good. I think ride chains is cool because it gave dynamic to deck building, whereas ride lines don't. Cross rides. I don't know where to put cross rides. I think cross rides maybe here. Yeah, I think in its time, being able to get an extra 2k made it super annoying for certain decks, but it also opened up deck building. I think deck building is a really crucial part of the game, where people need to deck build and innovate on their lists. And, you know, you play like these one-off techs. If you see Virgila now, it's running like 4 different grade 2s that are searchable from the ride line based on the situation. And I think that is really good depth. And Standard needs way more of that. So cross rides, right? In a meta where only some clans got 13k base Vanguards, you have to play 10k vanillas with 8k vanillas so that you could hit numbers. Sure, there are some clans that got like Fallon, you know, the 12k attackers, and then you boost by 7k, which is like fine, right? But like in the earlier stages, you still had to like play, you know, Oracle Guardian Apollo, and then you needed to play Bowmains that are 10k base, and then Gareth that is 8k base, so that you hit 18 and hitting magic numbers against 13. So there are some decks that you have to innovate with your deck and kind of beat around cross rides, because as the game progresses, the 13k suddenly gets more advantageous as the game progresses. So I think, you know, cross rides, very, very cool. Persona Blast. I think Persona Blast for me was a weird way for them to interact with grade 3s. I think some Persona Blasts are way better than others, and I think the way that they executed Persona Blast was very one-sided. I think, for example, Dote. Dote is really strong, and if you get a Persona Blast, then great. You know, your opponent's kind of rolling out the window. You know, you're restanding, and you compare this to something like Farah from Pale Moon, which is completely garbage. You know, and then you think about like Phantom Blast Overlord, like Persona Blast for that is just like what 10k one crit or something like that. So I think like the scale of Persona Blasts, the payoff for some clans were good, and I think as grade 3s progressed, Persona Blast became a very outdated mechanic. Other than Dote, obviously, I think Dote went on for like set 11, which is like Dauntless Dote. So the scalability of Dote was because of its skill. So I think Persona Blast could have been executed better. It's very similar to like Persona Ride, but Persona Ride is like so much more impactful because it just scales your tempo throughout the game. Persona Blast is like, sometimes maybe you have to like play around it. Your opponent's holding like a Dote in hand and they can Persona Blast if, you know, your opponent's Vanguard hits the rear guard or something. So there's a lot of like little things like that that just kind of needs to, you kind of need to be aware, right? But I think the use of grade 3s or the design of how grade 3s are supposed to be used was very ineffective and it wasn't scalable. So Persona Blast, I think, it's just okay. Like, it's not up to standard. I think the standard is like, you know, your perfect guards, right? I don't think it was up to standard. At least that's my thoughts anyways. Same with Limit Break. I think Limit Break was gating an effect behind a damage threshold that was so impactful that pretty much if you got to Limit Break 4, you're blowing your opponent out of the water to a position where they're dead or they're crippled and they can't fight back. So Limit Break, all well and good. One like Ezreal, you top core stuff, which is pretty cool. Maybe like Maelstrom cause a bunch. Maelstrom gives like extra attacks and retires or whatnot. Lucaire cause multiple units. I think that's pretty cool, but I think decks needed to be more flexible at all points in the game. So strong effects should probably be gated behind like a really high cost, but also maybe like Limit Break could have been executed better. I feel like as it got to like set 13, set 14 with like Minerva, Gamzot Zenith, Glendios, for example, I think the Limit Break effects got really out of hand. But it's also like the payoff was just not good enough. Ethics Buster, right? Ethics Buster's Limit Break 4 effect was just really strong. And I guess that kind of ties into Break Rise, but we'll talk about that in a sec. But Limit Breaks, I think the effects are strong, but gated behind such a high damage threshold that, yeah, I don't think the payoff for the skill was good. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. Like, I felt like a lot of the Limit Break stuff was just kind of like whatever. Ultimate Break, terrible. I think gating something behind 5 damage needs to be so game breaking that you can come back from the game. If you are shot to 5 damage, this effect must be so broken that, you know, you can come back from the game by being X amount of damage down. Maybe you shoot straight to 5 and then you come back to heal 2 or something. Like, Ultimate Break should be like divine skills, kind of. I don't know, like, it was gated behind such a high damage threshold, even further from Limit Break, and the payoff for the skills were just terrible. So, yeah, I don't know. Ultimate Break was just not it. Break Rides. Similar to Limit Break, again, gated behind a damage. I think there's a difference between Break Ride and cross Break Ride, which I'll explain in a sec, but Break Rides, I feel like you're limiting your deck to only functioning the moment you get to 4 damage, and if you're doing that, then your hand kind of expires 1 or 2 turns after that, or else you practically lose. So I think being able to play at all stages in the game is really good, which is what Dote did before Break Rides came out. Dote was so good because it could play at all stages of the game. Once you run to grade 3, you can restand with Dote, and you know, you're not gated behind 4 damage, whereas effects like Limit Break and Break Ride is. And I feel that that stops scalability of a deck from being what it is to being something better. Whereas, you know, something like Persona Blast, yeah, sure, you know, you could build and innovate on that, but you can only innovate so much. So I think like all three of these meet a criteria where deck building is very limited based on the restrictions that is put on a particular unit, right? Ganslock, Break Ride, for example, you have to be at 4 damage to get its full effect. It's like 3 units plus 10k, sure, whatever, right? But I think these effects could have been like maybe behind a Vanguard skill that is extra on top of something like, I don't know, on attack, CB1, I don't know, give a unit plus 5 or something like that. Or maybe CB2, call a unit or whatever. But you get the gist of it. Cross Break Rides. I think Cross Break Ride was cool because it opened up the best of both worlds. It gave you Break Ride, it gave you Cross Ride, and if you couldn't perform Break Ride, let's just say your opponent denies you at 3, you can still ride up and get the 13k base, which actually scales later into the game. So you can build your deck around that, and sometimes you can just forego the Break Ride and ride up to Cross Ride, and then you get a plus 2k buff, which, you know, incrementally gives you the advantage. So I think Cross Break Ride, very, very good. But I don't know, it's still got the Break Ride tag against it, but I guess like, you know, you don't just lose out on one whole skill, you still get a part of something else, which makes like, you know, deck building really cool, because sometimes you can just, you know, not worry about the Break Ride and just ride up and then get your cool abilities, yeah? Lock, everyone's best friend. I think Lock is poorly executed, but not bad. I think it gave a really cool mechanic, a very control-y mechanic, but I think it was executed in the wrong way. So when I talk about control, right, I think about Pokemon and Snorlax control. Trying to deprive your opponent from resources, but not necessarily crippling them to the point where, you know, they just lose out because they can't, their deck just can't function, you know? For example, Snorlax in Pokemon, right, the Blocklax, stopped your opponent from retreating. So you had to build your deck in a way to counter that. And I think that's really cool, right? Whereas in Vanguard, Lock as a mechanic, not all decks could build around that until you got to Strides, obviously. But when Lock came out in set 11, 12? Set 12. I think it was set 12. Infinite Zero Dragon came out in the trial deck, and then Nebula Lord came out in the booster set. And I think the Break Ride for Infinite Zero was really strong because it essentially locked out one whole column. But I feel that Lock should have been a mechanic where it grinds the game while your opponent is still trying to perform like as much of their abilities as possible, and you're withering them down, right? So I think the execution and the way that they implemented Lock was wrong, and I think the overarching sight of, or the vision of a Lock was there, but just not implemented in the right way. Quintet Walls. I think Quintet Walls was kind of whatever. I think it's like a different type of Sentinel, which paired well with Legion, because Legion returns stuff. So it was an alternate way to get stuff in the bin, but I think I'm not going to pay a CB to guard the top 5 cards in my deck. Like, it just feels bad because I have to use the CB for something else. So I feel Quintet Walls could have been done better in a way. Maybe like discard one from your hand, look at the top 5 and call, maybe. So like the cost of a Quintet Wall is similar to the cost of a Perfect Guard. And then, you know, if you like Overguard, like cool, that acts as a Perfect Guard, but if you Underguard, then at least the payoff is you get cards in the drop zone for Legion. So I think CB1 is pretty heavy in that time anyways, for Legion, and I don't think it was very good. Everyone just kind of used perfect cards anyways. Legion. I think Legion's pretty cool. I think Legion is a really cool mechanic. I think being able to play a longer game where you compress your deck, sometimes you heal, you guard with heals, you return to heals, you start healing down from 5 to 4, then 4 to 3, and then the game kind of drags on. It definitely isn't average. I think the Legion mechanic's cool because at the time of DOTX, the deck still paired with other mechanics like strides, still ran Forerunners, and you don't have the Legion straight away. One of the most degenerate decks was Mega Flare with Cat Butler. So being able to have dual grades on your Vanguard made it so that deck building was really interesting. Cat Butler was a completely disregarded card, and it came back and became an absolute menace in the format. So Legion actually opened up a lot of different deck building, and I think that's really cool. Also, it implemented the deck building restriction for clans only, because there was a really strong deck, Things of Abyss, that abused the Legion mechanic. And I think, being able to invest or innovate on something like that is really cool. But Legion, yeah, I think it's not S tier, it's not super broken or super advantageous or super intricate into a way where it completely warps your deck building or the way that you approach a game. But I think the mechanic is really cool, and it is something that you can still include now if you're super scared of decking out. Yeah. Strides. One of the best mechanics in Vanguard. And this is a pretty hot topic because I know a lot of people hate strides. And actually, if you play standard, the reason why you hate stride is because of the stride crest. Because it's power scaling, right? We didn't have power scaling back in OG Vanguard, right? We just had alternating Vanguards. And I think that is the beauty of strides. At any given situation, you can switch your Vanguard to have a different ability so that it accommodates for the board state, right? The game state. So for example, my Worlds deck for 2025, just now, I was playing Shout Loop, but I included pretty much one of every different stride for every single situation that I could think of. Like there was a card called War Deity Asura Kaiser, and not a single person would have ever thought of that card because the most intricate part of that stride is to purely return 1 grade 3 back to deck. And that is used for a particular situation that I foresee might happen. And I think strides make it so that deck building is really, really, really in-depth. I think being able to switch between different game modes pretty much mid-game and play super offensive to super defensive, it's a really good interactive way that Vanguard can shift the player's mindset. And I think Stride, one of, hands down, actually, it's probably one of the best, if not the best, mechanic ever released for Vanguard. People say Strides, oh, it's so strong. It gains plus 15k. For its time, it was very strong. But if you talk about that now, when Bavsagra is the best deck in the format, hold up, okay? Sure, if you didn't have Stride Crest, I think Strides would be really good. I think every deck should have a Stride deck, right? Every deck should have a G-Zone. And that is purely to alter your Vanguard's ability so that it can cope with different situations. If I'm going into Bavsaga right now, I would love to have a card that just says, I don't know, ride, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 2, draw 2, Ichigishima, right? That would be so good because then I'm able to just draw, farm up, get through a push turn, and, get through another turn of Bavsaga, right? But I can't do that. My deck is just, Virgila, I get to rewrite a grade 3 and just bash, or I'm Heart Luru, or I'm Youthberg, and I'm just bashing your face in. There's no different game mode or different game state that I can jump to, and I think that is what Stride brings, and I think that is really, really cool. Really hope that every single deck in Vanguard Standard is able to have a stride or some strides that alter the Vanguard's effect. And I think that is very cool because it allows for better deck building, better game adaptation at any point in the game, and it just allows for much more flavor in standard. Generation Break. Generation Break actually is kind of whatever. It's very similar to Limit Break. Although, Generation Break allowed it so that higher and stronger effects became gated behind however many G-Zone you have face up, right? For example, Beyond Order, which is a GB8, is gated behind being able to have 7 in the G-Zone and 1 on your Vanguard, because 1 on your Vanguard counts as GB, right? And the payoff for that effect is really strong. In comparison to something that doesn't have GB, right? Metallica Phoenix. This is probably a really bad example because Metallica Phoenix is really strong for its time anyways. Then you go to something like Chrono Dragon Next Stage, which is gated behind GB2 or GB3. So more stronger effects scaled by however many Generation Break that you have. So I think Generation Break is actually pretty average. You know, like, I think it's good. It's good because it gates effects, but it's not bad. I think it's bad for deck building. Like, later on, Sanctuary Guard Dragon essentially got a card called Sword Me, and it paired with Jewel Knights. And Sword Me was so strong because it was not gated by GB, it can play an early game. So it made deck building much better. But I think Generation Break actually altered how cards were designed later on in the game because of how lackluster the early game and the mid game was, because you were so gated behind cards that don't have effects until you strike. So I think Generation Break is there because it is as impactful for the history of Vanguard, right? Cards now wouldn't be as good if it wasn't for Generation Break stopping every single busted effect behind a GB, yeah? G-Assist. I think the mechanic is great. Obviously back then we didn't have ride decks, so being able to G-Assist was good. It was definitely better than being grade stuck and sitting down at grade 1 and not being able to do anything and your opponent just absolutely destroys you. So I think G-Assist is a great way to assist with that or help with that. Generation Guard. One of the best, if not the best mechanic, and it is because it is on the opponent's turn. Being able to have multiple defensive options for certain situations is really strong. Take Denial Griffin, for example. If your opponent is attacking for 60k or 70k and you don't have a perfect guard, you at least have 4 cards that you can use in your deck, heal triggers, to summon a G-Guardian, which retires the attacking unit. I think that's great, you know, because it makes the opponent have to play around that. And I think that is major skill expression. If your opponent has to play around something and you being on the other side of that, you know, you can kind of predict what they're trying to do and then play G-Guards accordingly. And then on the flip side, when you're playing into somebody else, you have to play around their G-Guardians, knowing well and truly that, oh, your opponent's probably going to go into an ultimate strike next turn, probably shouldn't attack, pass the turn so that they don't use the flip G-Guard and get into like Megiddo or Dust or something like that. So I think G-Guardians made it so that players thought outside of the box. I think they're more cautious, they're more expressive with their actions. I think when they start attacking, they have to think, oh, what are the A, B, C, and D things that could happen if I do attack, right? And I think people who were developed in Stride and Generation Guard era have a really high IQ in the game because they can predict and see what things that they're anticipating in the current turn or the next turn or the turn after that. So I think G-Guardians, insane mechanic. I think they should bring G-Guardians into Standard. Obviously, don't translate the ones that are already there. I think if you want to start with G-Guardians in Standard, just bring all the Cray Elemental ones. Dismal, absolutely amazing to protect a rear guard. Screw, you can just discard a card, gain 10, so it becomes, 25k shield. Stuff like a Gleam, you can discard and draw 1. Rack Tome as well, discard, draw 1. Colburn, if your opponent has super high hand, you can just discard a card and it gains scalable 5k for every 2 cards in their hand. So I think, if Standard ever gets G Guardians, I think it would be an amazing addition to the game. It makes people think outside of the box and makes deck building really, really creative. I think G Guardians are very good. Ultimate Stride. So as much as Strides is in S tier, I think Ultimate Strides were just okay. I think Ultimate Strides gave an option to every single clan for a somewhat like a comeback mechanic or a finisher. Some clans didn't get as good of a finisher than some other clans, right? Take Tachikaze, for example. Actually, Tachikaze is a pretty bad example. Maybe like Nobutamma back in the day. They just kind of had Rene, and that was about it. Yeah. Or maybe like Narukami. Yeah, Narukami maybe is like a better example. Or like Murakumo. Yeah, Murakumo. That's an amazing example. All of their strides were like just kind of whatever, right? Homura Raider, sure. You have like Yasue, Shadow Stitch, yeah. But Drachma gave like a completely different stride that was so out of like Murakumo's identity that made it really strong for them to capitalize on the game, to finish the game. Some Xerath Dragons were better than others. Stark, for example, was really strong. Zoa at one point was really strong. Dust, I think overall is one of the best, if not the best, Ultimate Stride. Ultimate was really good in 2019 with Ezel, and then completely dropped off once the Overtrigger came out. And now it's probably like one of the worst. And Drachma was really strong in set 13. Back in 2017 Worlds, I played Overlord with Drachma. I think that Ultimate Stride was really strong. But now it becomes completely worthless. So yeah, I think Ultimate Stride's just okay. I think they could have developed more. And Ultimate Strides, the payoff is really strong, but if you don't finish them, then you're a sitting duck kind of thing. So I think Ultimate Strides, if they ever bring it back somehow, would be really cool to have different alternate win conditions, or comeback mechanics with Ultimate Stride that makes it so that it's so impactful that it's a once per game action, so to say. Imaginary gifts. I'm actually pretty indifferent about imaginary gifts. And I think we have to kind of talk about it together. So imaginary gifts was a way for Vanguard to utilize grade 3s. And I think coming off Strides, going into an imaginary gift era was a bit odd. I don't know. I personally didn't like imaginary gifts until they released XL2. And I think XL2 is completely busted. I think the imaginary gift was so beyond its time, and it made XL decks really strong. And I think things got out of hand when Luard came into the picture, right? Creating three force per turn. So I think imaginary gifts, I personally think, was kind of garbage. And as much as they gave these imaginary gifts to do certain things, I think they could have implemented like a different way to utilize the grade 3s in that era. I feel like if they implemented Persona Ride in that spot, it might have been better. I don't know. I think the flavor was just it I don't know how to say it. I just feel like the payoff for imaginary gifts was so game warping that if you didn't get an imaginary gift, your tempo slows down a lot. Even if you ride a Heal Guardian, right? And then you run imaginary gift after, it just feels really bad because you're already one step behind your opponent who got imaginary gifts every single turn. So Obviously, some gifts are better than others. Excel, for example, Excel 2. But then there are options, right? So maybe like the options made it so that the deck building was good. So maybe it goes in C. So it's not as bad as we think it is. Like, it's not Quintet War, Ultimate Break, Special Intercept, and Mega Blast. Like, let's be real. But I don't think it's good enough to be in the average tier. I think there were more cons, I think. But then, I guess, superior strides would have been cool with, like, I don't know, extra markers maybe. But I think the scalability of markers just made it a really big problem. Like, scaling Force is way stronger than scaling Imaginary Gift Protect 2, right? So I think that's where it kind of sits because of that. Like, if it wasn't for scaling Force, it might be like B tier. But I think, like, you gotta talk about the differences in imaginary gifts and I guess the payoff for some decks versus others. But I think it just kind of got out of hand, and yeah, I don't know. I don't like the mechanic. It's not as great as I, holistically thought it was. Draw PGs. I think draw PGs are great. As well as 30k crits. It gave a different deck dynamic. It allowed for people to play Sentinels in deck, but not eat up a main deck slot. Well, a normal unit slot. So being able to trade your alternate triggers into draw PGs made it so that decks weren't as aggressive with the crits or the fronts, right? So they put draws instead. So draws, like, really good. I think draws also means that if you hit this defensively or you hit this offensively, then the PG itself pays for itself. So I think that's really cool. 30k crits as well. Like, you can substitute out a complete nullify for a high-powered shield whilst increasing the aggression of your deck. So it made it so that deck building is diverse in some ways. And I think, it adds more depth to the game, and it adds more creativity in deck building, and that is definitely something that Standard would actually love right now. Orders. I think Orders is an S tier mechanic. I think Orders gave a different type of card in the game. I think now they are implementing orders like set orders, blitz orders. They're using arms for Vanguard. So I think orders themselves made it so that the game design increased, right? There's now Regalis pieces that are orders, and there are, like, blitz orders that are really strong, like Defending Roar, Ghost Chase. So I think orders as a type of card made it so that deck building is very different. Although I feel that it only started in Standard, but it doesn't translate all that too well into Premium. So I think maybe orders could be like here. So maybe it's not S tier. Like, S tier means that it fulfills a lot, right? But I think orders, really good. I think it gave blitz orders kind of like trap cards or spell cards. I think that's a cool mechanic. And quick play cards, and there are cards that allow you to use multiple orders in the same turn, i.e. persona shields. So it gave a lot of different game designs as the game progressed. Ride deck. I think Ride deck is just okay. Ride deck made it so that G-assist you don't need to G-assist, but I think that takes away the deck creativity, right? Some people play 4 grade 1s that is part of your ride chain with like 1 or 2 blaster darts, for example. Like, so you play 4 blaster javelins. So that's part of your deck building, And ride deck essentially takes that away. It means that you always get the perfect ride every single turn, and there's nothing like you can do about it. So I think deck building wise, it made it so that deck building is very limited. It meant that every single ride was good. I would have liked to see ride decks be something like, if it was an alternate ride, that would be really cool. Like a different way of riding, and just still ride from the main deck, but sometimes you need to alternatively ride into an 8K or a 7k to swing under, and I think, you know, ride deck would have been cool in that respect. So I think just B, it's good, you know, not going to complain in comparison to some of the other mechanics we're going to talk about. Persona Ride. I think Persona Ride is, yeah, just whatever. Like, I think being able to ride it to a grade 3 and give you a front row plus 10 on consecutive turns is so impactful, and if you miss out, like, you lose so much tempo. So I think making your main grade 3 have Persona Ride, and I guess giving it a skill that is, if you miss it, you're kind of doomed. Like, feels really bad. So I think they could have done Persona Ride in a different way where, I don't know, it's really hard, right? Because you could technically implement strides and that would just, you know, change the need for Persona Ride. Sure, you can like Persona Ride and stride or whatever, but yeah, you know, like, it just feels like they tried to do something with the grade 3s in the deck, and yeah, if you miss Persona Ride, it just feels really bad. So yeah, I'm unsure. I feel like every time I miss Persona Ride, I feel really bad. Until I play Balsagra, when it doesn't really matter, because the power is just ridiculous. Overtriggers, worst mechanic in Vanguard, full stop. Like, how can you tell me that 100 mil with a restanding Vanguard is healthy for the game? Let's just say you've played to your outs the whole game, you're about to win, your opponent no guards at 6, oh, I hit a defensive overtrigger, all of your hard work into the bin, and I just win this game, right? Overtriggers, absolutely busted, should be banned from the game, and I think a lot of people have vetted for this. I don't know why it's still there, like, just get rid of it. So, Overtriggers, need I say more? I don't think I do. Everyone's got hit by an OT at some point in their life, and to be honest, like, I think I've been hit by Overtriggers so many times that I'm now immune to Overtriggers affecting me now mentally. The amount of brain cells I lost because an Overtrigger was hit on me offensively or defensively, the amount of times that I hit offensive Overtrigger or defensive Overtrigger on my opponent and my opponent can't do anything, it just feels really, really bad. Absolutely terrible mechanic, and I feel in comparison to some of the other games in the industry at the moment, as long as the Overtrigger stays in the game, I can't take Vanguard seriously to be in the top 5 games in the world. Just because of how luck-sacky this mechanic is, how, oh yeah, you have this one broken card in your deck, and if you hit it defensive or offensively, you just win the game. You know, it's just so terrible. Like, if they got rid of the 100 million power, sure, no worries, absolutely fine. Like, reduce all Overtriggers to 10k power, no worries. You can still have the added effects, you can still have a restanding Vanguard, you can still have the double crits, no worries. But 100 million power, the fact that you cannot guard it without a perfect guard is just absolutely terrible. Get rid of it. Get rid of Overtriggers. Rant finished. All right, Heal Guardians, also an A tier mechanic. Again, makes deck building very interesting. It made that the early game, if your opponent rides up to grade 3 and absolutely obliterates you, you have a way to mitigate it by negating 2 crit on your opponent's Vanguard, or give your Vanguard 10k against a rush deck. Yeah. So Heal Guardians, very, very good. It also contributed as a stride fodder cost. So being able to stride off ditching a grade 3, which is cool too. If your opponent hard damage denies you at 0, you can give yourself 1 damage to do the minimum of what your deck can do. That one is a little bit so I think like the payoff for damage denying is like yeah, not really good. But I guess like your opponent's trading a G Guardian because they're dropping a heal onto rear guard for an extra damage is like the payoff. So I guess that's like the trade-off, yeah. But also, back then we don't have ride lines. So riding a grade 3 meant that your ride consistency is better. At least then you can still play the game. So Heal Guardians, you know, it made it so that your deck ratios are slightly different, but yeah, mostly good in the long run. Stride crests, absolutely terrible. And I think they should never have implemented this even in standard. And I think they should have implemented strides so that it was strong enough to be coping with the rest of the decks in the format. I think if you gave Shurunui like stronger rear guards, maybe like a stronger Furai as the game progressed, then maybe it's better. But Stride Crest is just not it. Even in Premium, when Harry and Night Rose came out, Crest Rose, Crest Harry were the best decks in the format, and no deck competed with it. But that's an odd case, right? Like, I think if we just remove Strike Crest entirely, I think Standard would be much better. I think the way that they could have developed Shunui in Standard and Night Rose, Harry, Messiah, Jet, I think they could have done better, and maybe gave, I don't know, something else than a Stride Crest. I don't know. I don't know how they would have done it, but somehow, power scaling, I don't know. I don't think power scaling is the answer. Maybe like stronger strides, stronger rear guards or something. I'm not too sure. But yeah, Stride Crest, terrible. Regalis piece. I think Regalis piece, I think it's an A mechanic. I think Regalis piece gave a dynamic in the game where you have a really strong effect that is not completely game breaking. Maybe other than Bracing Angel Ladder in Premium, but that's an odd case. But in Standard at the moment, it's a really good utility card, right? Jejult Ignis uses Forbiddal Surrogate, which makes the deck Omega consistent. Blankmire uses Caliburn, which allows you to countercharge. If you're, starving on CB, your opponent damage denies you, you can use the Caliburn to countercharge. Varga as well. Twincast is a really strong, Regalis piece, but it's not overly broken, You can still guard with 10k, guard with 15 again, and I think that's really cool. So being able to develop on Regalis piece as a deck building mechanic is really cool because it gives the deck more deck building options, and more deck building options is always welcome. Energy. I think energy is okay, but they can do so much more with energy. So one thing I thought, right, why is Energy Generator locked behind Energy Blast 7 draw 1? And why is it always locked behind getting 3 energy per turn, right? So what if you release a different energy generator that gave 2 energy per turn, or 4 energy per turn, or I don't know, like maybe the Energy Blast 7 is like different, or like Energy Blast 2 and then you can like Energy Blast 9 for, I don't know, some stronger effect or something. And I think energy being something that is, you get it in increments of 3, it just feels like every effect like Shoujo Doji is like so linear. You're gonna always pay the EB3. Virgila, you're always gonna pay the EB3. So I guess like energy can be developed on more. I feel that we've had it for what, 3 years maybe? And it hasn't really moved. Actually, maybe 3 years, 2 years, 2.5 years. I feel like they could have, they can develop way more on energy. I'm not too sure how. Maybe take Dons in One Piece, for example, somehow. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe like energy generator can be something else. Like maybe, because I'm just thinking for like buddy fight, right? Being able to have a gauge, that's really cool. Being able to have an alternate energy generator into something else. Energy generator, the buddy fight gauge. Maybe there's like another generic energy effect or something, You get like 1 energy per turn, but then you can charge a card face down as an energy to draw. I don't know. Like I think they can just develop more on energy. Divine Skill. I think Divine Skill is a pretty cool effect, but I feel that it is so locked behind only some decks, which I think should be given to more decks or all decks. Something similar to like the Ace unit where it's like, your grand skill. Like we talk about Pokemon and V-Star effects, right? Available to pretty much all decks because they can deck build, right? Like if Rezael was a rearguard effect. That would be really cool. You splash a Regalis in a deck, you Soul Blast one, you Divine Skill, you put the crits back to deck, then deck building just becomes so much more innovative for other decks that aren't Regalis. So maybe this is something that they can explore in the future, and I think it would be really cool that, you know, Divine Skills can be splashed and not Vanguard centric. I think Vanguard centric Divine Skills is like kind of whatever, right? It's more like, I guess, then you're talking about ace units. Yeah, maybe like, I don't know. Maybe they could give you like an arms order that can be armed or held by any Vanguard, right? And then it's like Divine Skills, search for a card in your deck and add it to your hand without showing your opponent or something. Like, that would be really cool. I think that's a pretty cool mechanic. All right, yeah, big shout out to me if I ever get that card. Anyways, ace unit, similar kind of area with like Divine Skill, Regalis pieces, or one of you in deck. I think if you get the ace unit early in the game, it's really impactful, and I think they can expand on ace units. I feel that ace units could be like Radiance in Pokemon, where it can just kind of stay on the board and you get just like really good utility skills. You know, maybe there's like a generic ace unit that says once per turn you can discard a card and draw one, and it's a hard once per turn. Like, that would be really cool. Like, filtering out my hand to get like PGs or Persona rides like for the next turn would be really cool. So being able to have like an ace unit that can do that or something similar to that would be very cool. D-Legion. I think D-Legion is a terrible mechanic. Even though I put Legion in A, like, why are you restricting Legion to 2 triggers and 2 normal units when you don't get Persona Ride, you don't get any power scaling? Like, what are you trying to achieve? You know, like, just give us Legion back. You're not gonna get Persona Rides, you're not gonna get power scaling. Sure, you return 4 triggers back to deck. Maybe you just omit the fact that you cannot return an Overtrigger, right? Like, at least then you can play Legion. I think that would be really cool, you know? Think Saver Dragon, you know, you can restand and you return triggers and then you trigger more. I think that's really good, you know? Given that you don't have the power scaling. So you don't get the Persona Ride, you don't get the front row plus 10, but at least then you get the trigger power or the more consistent trigger checks instead. So yeah, that is pretty much me and rambling on for nearly an hour on all of the mechanics in Vanguard. So just to recap, the best mechanics in my opinion are G Guardians, Strides, and Forerunners. It gave insane dynamic into deck building, into gameplay, into like interactions in the game. It was just really, really good. Being able to deck build differently, alter your Vanguard, it was a blessing, and I hope they bring all 3 of these mechanics back into Standard. Like, I will forever play Vanguard if these 3 mechanics ever return to Standard. Like, I will main Standard for sure. The others, you know, nice to have, very good for deck building, very good for expanding the game, and definitely stuff that they should be considering for deck building. I think a lot of these are deck building related, right? Like orders, for example. Like, if we're talking about these are all deck building, you know? Ace unit, deck building. Divine Skill, deck building. Regalis, deck building. Hill Guardians, 30k crits, draw PGs, orders. They're all deck building mechanics, and deck building mechanic is really good. Perfect Guards, you know, it's just whatever, and I guess the others are just kind of whatever mechanics. And then, yeah, if we look at the next tier, it's just stuff that wasn't executed right, and D is like the overcosted, the stuff that they tried to make good, and I feel like could have done way, way better. And then F tier is like, these cards should never have ever existed in our lifetime. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you guys liked it. Comment down below what you guys think of all the mechanics in Vanguard. If you guys haven't already, click that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.